among us and the military about extending. Our hope is we will not have to extend, but there are going to be discussions, I suspect, on how far along we are in the process.
We're days away from President Joe Biden's August 31st deadline to remove the remaining U.S. troops out of Afghanistan. Today, the president says 11,000 people evacuated from Kabul this weekend. He says his administration is committed to getting Americans out of the country as quickly and safely as possible. The president says he is also activating the civilian reserve air fleet to help move evacuees from other countries into the U.S.
This is a voluntary program for our commercial airlines, and we're grateful for those airlines and the U.S. carriers who are supporting us. This effort will only use 3 or 4 planes from each of the major carriers, vast fleets of aircraft. So there should be no effect or a minimal effect on commercial air travel, and we'll stay in close coordination with our partners to mitigate any impact.
Now, there's a lot to break down following President Biden's message today to the American people. Wes Bryant is retired from the U.S. Air Force. He was the tactical lead for a contingent of special operations and one of the first troops in Iraq to stop ISIS. He is also the co-author of Hunting the Caliphate. Wes, good evening and welcome to BNC.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And Wes, first your reaction to the president speaking today about what he said on the latest in Afghanistan.
I think overall it was good, considering where we're at. I'm of the mindset that we have to move from the position we're at right now, regardless of any mistakes that might have been made, failures that might have been had on part of the U.S. as well as the Afghan government and military. One thing that resonated, he mentioned that the Taliban have stuck to their word of not attacking U.S. forces, and that's true from all reports. I think they know full well what will happen if that occurs. But we also know, and I know from personal ties within that country, that there are Afghans being hunted by the Taliban. So you have that discrepancy going on as well at the same time as this messaging coming from the administration.
Yeah, and many Americans now saying the removal of the troops in Afghanistan was executed poorly. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I do agree to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. What I blame, the first blame for me is on the Taliban, who, with this protracted, this long peace negotiation that we conducted, then went back on their word in many areas, right? Then I blame the Afghan senior political leadership who just fled, and senior military leadership who either formed deals with the Taliban, which now we're seeing started back in the fall or earlier, or simply surrendered. So there are just a lot of factors with this. But yes, I do think the withdrawal as well itself could have been handled quite differently. I don't think anyone, I didn't as well, believe the Taliban would take the country in 11 days. And I wasn't for the peace agreement from the start, even when the Obama administration was beginning negotiations.
And if it were you, what do you think should have been done differently? How should it have been handled?
Well, I would have scrapped this agreement with the Taliban, because even as of Biden taking office, they had already ramped up attacks against the Afghan government. They were not denouncing al-Qaeda. There was no language in there about protections for women, for example, which is a huge fear now. So I would have scrapped the whole thing, and my only withdrawal was a good idea, but the only plan or negotiation should have been between the U.S., NATO, and the Afghan government itself. And the message to the Taliban should have been, we're not dealing with you as a near equal. You can be a part of the Afghan government if you do it peacefully, and that is between you and the Afghan government when we leave. That's how I would have preferred to handle it.
Yeah. And Wes, tell us about your time in Afghanistan while hunting ISIS and the mission under the Obama administration. Do you think things are being handled much differently?
Well, I was in Afghanistan under, all 4 administrations. And, each one had their successes and failures. My last tour there was in 2017 under the Trump administration. I had already helped initiate the strike cell against ISIS in 2014 in Iraq. I then conducted an airstrike campaign over Syria in 2015, and then I went back to Afghanistan in 2017 after not having been there since 2013 to be the lead Special Operations JTAC in the Special Operations Task Force there. And now we were running Special Forces teams with our JTACs against both the Taliban and ISIS-K. So we continued that effort, from 2017 on up to today. Starting around 2019 and especially into 2020, the operations scaled down quite extensively on the U.S. side, and even got to the point where we were mandated only to conduct unilateral operations, meaning the Afghans would conduct operations by themselves without U.S. on the ground, but we would still support with close air support and U.S. air power, NATO air power. One of the many failures that went wrong on the U.S. side is really we enabled the Afghan forces for all these years, for 20 years, to be overly reliant on our support, specifically our air support. That's not to detract from the bravery and the sacrifice of the Afghan forces,
right?
But that is a fact, and we did pull that out fairly quickly. Now, there was some warning, but we pulled all that support out fairly quickly in the end, which added to this, the ease of the Taliban coming in and doing what they've done.
A very interesting perspective there, having spending time there. So Wes, in your book, you talk about America's war on ISIS and the strike cell. How does the Afghan war compare?
Well, it's a bit different. We had completely withdrawn from Iraq, and the Iraqi military and the Kurds up north were quite a bit more capable than even the Afghan military. And we've left the Afghan military very, very capable. As well, ISIS didn't take over all of Iraq by the time we went in. They had taken northeast Syria and parts of northwest Iraq, and we went in summer of 2014 because there was a threat against the northern capital of Erbil, what they call the Kurdish capital, and then the actual capital in Baghdad. So there was never a breakdown of Iraqi government and a surrender in mass of the Iraqi military forces. So this is quite different, quite a different conundrum, and more difficult in many ways.
And just looking at what we've seen over the last week or so, and what's happening over in Afghanistan, when you look at that yourself, how difficult of a mission is it that the U.S. is trying to carry out?
This is extremely difficult. I mean, the airlift operation in and of itself, with the scale, is so hard. But if anyone can do it, it's the U.S. Air Force, U.S. DoD, and our allies. And then you add the security on the ground, which is can be fleeting. Right now, we feel good in that we're working diplomacy with the Taliban, which is the only resort right now. There's one of two options. It's continue diplomacy with the Taliban, who we've already acknowledged, or go back to full-scale war. And so it's a really hard decision there. And I can understand where the administration's at, where our military leaders are at right now. You also have the threats of ISIS that have popped up, and my thought to that is that, and my hope, really, of course, is that ISIS, it's in their best interest for us to leave, so that they just back off anyway until we're out of there, and we get everyone out that we want out, and then they can resume their fight with the Taliban, because they're sworn enemies as well.
Is the president's deadline realistic?
I don't think it's realistic. I think it's going to push, and luckily what I saw in the speech, were indicators that he's willing to push it if need be, operationally.
All right.
We've got now, we're conducting NEO operations, these non-combatant evacuation operations of American personnel, those affiliated with the U.S., the SIVs, thousands of people that we didn't originally intend on evacuating because we thought Afghanistan was going to remain somewhat stable with, of course, attacks from the Taliban, which were already occurring, but we just didn't foresee this. And I consider myself a huge critic of the strategy there, and I didn't foresee an 11-day takeover of all of Afghanistan.
Yeah, President has said before, it happened way quicker than we thought. Well, Wes Bryant, we want to thank you personally for your service, and thank you so much for joining us to weigh in on this for us tonight.